How do you stay calm when your own son erases you from his wedding day? How do you respond when you show up with a life-changing gift and realize they planned the real ceremony without you? This is how I went from the embarrassing old dad they hid in the background to the man who quietly closed the tap on every cent they were counting on. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Michael Harris, but most people call me Mike. I am 58 years old. I own a small auto repair shop at the edge of our town. My days are simple. I fix cars, I drink coffee that is too strong, and I go home to a quiet apartment. I do not think of myself as special or important. I am just a man who tries to show up when it matters. That morning, I woke up before my alarm. For a moment, I did not remember why, and then it hit me. It was my son Ethan's wedding day. At least, that is what I believed. My heart started to beat a little faster. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, feeling that old mix of pride and nervousness that only a parent understands. I told myself that this was his day, not mine, and that I just had to be there, smile, and hand him the envelope that was sitting on my kitchen counter. I got up, made coffee, and set the mug down next to the envelope. It was thick, almost heavy. Inside was a check that represented years of saving and years of small choices. I did not live a fancy life. I drove an old truck. I wore the same 2 work shirts most days. But every month, I put away a little money for Ethan's future. I always imagined giving it to him on a big day. First, I thought it would be his college graduation. Then it became his first house. In the end, I decided that his wedding would be right. A new start, a new family, a clean gift. I checked my phone again. The message from my ex-wife, Laura, was still there. She had sent it a week before. It gave the name of the restaurant, the time, and a short note that said the ceremony would be small and simple, just close family. I had read that line many times. The idea of close family hurt a little, because over the years I felt that I was not part of that circle anymore. But she had written that I should come, and that was enough for me. I ironed my best shirt. It was white, but not bright white anymore, more like the color of paper that had been in a drawer for years. I pressed every crease with care. I took my old suit pants from the hanger and brushed them with my hand. The fabric was a little shiny at the knees, but it was the best I had. I shaved, checked the mirror, and told myself that I looked fine for a father of the groom. Before I left, I took the envelope and wrote on it with a blue pen. I wrote that it was for Ethan and his new wife, from Dad, with love. My handwriting looked a bit shaky, and I thought that my hand was just tired. I slipped the envelope into my inside jacket pocket and patted it, just to be sure it was there. That small pat on my chest felt like I was checking that my heart was in place. The drive to the restaurant took about 30 minutes. It was in a nice part of town, not far from where Laura and her new husband Richard lived. On the way, I went through all the possible awkward moments in my head. I imagined Laura making polite small talk. I imagined Richard shaking my hand with that firm grip he always used, as if he needed to prove something. I imagined Ethan looking nervous and excited. I imagined Chloe, his fiancée, smiling for pictures. The sky was gray but dry. Traffic was light. I arrived at the restaurant early, almost half an hour before the time in the message. I have always been early to important things. I parked, sat in the car for a moment, and checked the message again. Same place, same time. I felt a small ripple of anxiety, the way you feel when you double-check your boarding pass at the airport even though you know it is correct. Inside the restaurant, the air was warm and smelled of garlic and baked bread. A hostess smiled at me and asked if she could help. I told her my name and that I was there for a wedding. She looked at the reservation book, ran her finger down the list, and then paused. I felt my stomach tighten. She said that there was no wedding listed, only a reservation for later under the name Mason. That was Laura's new last name. She added that it looked like a family dinner, not a ceremony. For a second, I thought I had made a simple mistake. Maybe I misread the message. Maybe I mixed up dates. I took out my phone and checked again, right there at the host stand. Same information, same date, same time. I showed it to her. She frowned and said that the private room was set up for the Mason dinner at 7, but there was nothing about a wedding ceremony. She suggested that I could wait in the bar until the rest of the party arrived. I tried to smile and said that I would do that. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. I walked into the bar area and sat on a stool. The bartender asked if I wanted something to drink. I told him I would just have water for now. While I waited, I watched the staff move in and out of the private room. Through the open door, I saw a long table with white cloth, folded napkins, simple flower vases. It did look more like a family dinner than a wedding, but I told myself that maybe it would be a very casual ceremony. After about 10 minutes, I decided to call Laura. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a short message saying that I was at the restaurant, that I was at the bar, and that I was not sure where to go. Then I texted Ethan and asked if I had the right place and time. For a moment, I stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 dots that show someone is typing. Nothing appeared. Other guests came into the bar, couples and families. Some were dressed up, some were in jeans. I felt aware of my suit, aware of my age. I saw my reflection in the long mirror behind the bottles. A man with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes looked back at me. He did not look weak, but he did look tired. I straightened my tie and told myself to relax. 15 more minutes passed. Still no answer. I worried that maybe they had already started somewhere else in the building, and I was missing it. I went back to the hostess and asked again if there was any event for Ethan's name. She shook her head, but she seemed kinder this time. She said that sometimes families book ceremonies at other venues and then just come to the restaurant for dinner. She added that the Mason party had not arrived yet. That sentence hit me like a small punch. I remembered the word small from Laura's text, the part about a small ceremony. A thought started to form in my mind, one that I did not want to complete. I stood there, feeling suddenly foolish in my suit, holding my phone in one hand and my car keys in the other. A couple seated near the entrance looked at me with curiosity, and I could almost feel their guess that I was a confused older man who had mixed up his dates. My phone finally buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. The reply was short and casual. He wrote that the ceremony had been yesterday at the country club, that it had all been a bit last minute, and that tonight was only a little dinner with Chloe's family. He added that I could stop by if I wanted, but that they were already almost done with photos and things. I read the message twice. The words blurred for a second, and then came back into focus. Yesterday. Country club. Only a little dinner. Already almost done. I thought about the words small ceremony, and realized that to them, small had not meant what I thought. It had meant without me. The hostess saw the change in my face and asked quietly if everything was all right. I told her that there had been a mix-up and that I would not be staying. I could hear my voice from far away. It sounded calm. Too calm, maybe. She gave me a look that held real sympathy, and for a second I felt more seen by this stranger than by my own son. I walked back through the bar. The bartender lifted the glass of water and asked with his eyes if I wanted it. I shook my head and told him that plans had changed. He nodded and said that it happened sometimes. I felt stupid for thinking that this night would be different from all the other times I had been pushed to the side. I could feel people watching me as I left, though maybe that was just in my head. In the parking lot, the air was cold and sharper than before. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. The car felt like another world, small and quiet. The envelope in my jacket pocket pressed against my chest. I took it out and looked at my own handwriting on the front. I thought about all the extra shifts, all the weekends at the shop, all the times I had said no to myself so that I could say yes to Ethan's future. I opened the envelope and slid out the check. The numbers on it were large for someone like me. It was not rich people money, not the kind of money that buys clubs and yachts, but it was years of my work made into ink on paper. My hand did not shake now. It was steady. Very slowly, I tore the check in half. The sound was soft but clear in the small space of the car. Then I tore it again and again until it was just a handful of white and blue pieces. I dropped them into an empty coffee cup in the console. It felt like dropping something heavy into a deep well. I did not cry. My eyes stayed dry. I just sat there and listened to my own breathing. I told myself that if I was not needed as a father on the most important day of his life, then maybe my money was not needed either. I did not say it with anger, not even inside my own head. I said it like a simple fact. I knew that this act would not change the past. It would not make Laura invite me to the country club. It would not move Richard out of the center of the photographs. But it changed something in me. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from a social media app. Ethan had uploaded a new album from the wedding. The preview image showed him in a suit, Chloe in her dress, and Richard standing beside him with a proud hand on his shoulder. The title of the album called Richard the Man Who Had Given Ethan Away. I was not in the picture. I was not in any of them. In that moment, sitting alone in my car outside the wrong restaurant on the wrong day, I understood exactly how invisible I had become in my own son's story. The next morning, my alarm rang at 5:30 like always. For a second, I thought about turning it off and staying in bed. My body felt heavy, like someone had put an extra blanket of stone on top of me. But the shop would open at 8, and cars did not fix themselves. My customers counted on me, even if my own family did not. I got up, made coffee, and stood by the kitchen window while the machine hummed. The city outside was still half asleep. Streetlights glowed over empty sidewalks. In the sink, there was the same plate from last night, the same fork. In the trash, the coffee cup with the torn pieces of the check sat near the top. For a moment, I thought about taking the pieces out, taping them back together, pretending none of this had happened, but I knew that even if the bank accepted it, the feeling in my chest would not change. At the shop, the familiar smell of oil and rubber greeted me. It sounds strange, but that smell always felt like home. I flipped the sign to open, turned on the lights, and started rolling up the bay doors. The sky was pale, with a line of orange at the edge. It was going to be another normal day for everyone else. My foreman, Luis, arrived a few minutes later. He was in his 40s, short, strong, always in a faded baseball cap. He had worked with me for over 10 years. When his marriage fell apart, he said I had given him a job when no one else would. I always thought he exaggerated. He was the kind of guy any shop would be lucky to have. He looked at my face, then at the clock, and asked if everything was okay. I told him I was just tired. He watched me for a second longer, then said I looked like I had slept in a chair, not a bed. That was his way of asking if something hurt without making it too soft. I thought about lying, but the words came out by themselves. I told him I had gone to Ethan's wedding the night before and walked into an empty restaurant. I told him how I found out the real ceremony had been at the country club the day before, without me. I kept my voice even. I described the host stand, the empty private room, the text message. I did not mention the torn check. That part felt too private still. Luis swore under his breath, but used a mild word. He said it was wrong. He said if it had been him, he would have shouted, flipped tables, done something loud. I shook my head. I told him there was no point. You cannot shout someone into respecting you. All you can do is decide how much of yourself you keep giving them. The first customers arrived, and work pulled us apart. There was a van with a broken timing belt, a sedan that needed brakes, a pickup in for an oil change. My hands moved on their own, muscle memory from years under cars. While I worked, my mind replayed old scenes one after another, like someone had hit play on a long, quiet movie. I remembered Ethan as a little boy, lying on his stomach under the kitchen table while I fixed a loose leg. He had asked me 100 questions about tools and screws. Back then, he said I was the strongest man he knew. I remembered how proud he was when he got his first bike, and I adjusted the chain for him. When he fell and scraped his knee, he had run to me, not to Laura. Things started to change when he got older. After the divorce, Laura had more time and money than I did. She worked in an office with clean clothes and regular hours. I worked at the shop, with oil on my hands and late nights. At first, we tried to keep things balanced. I had him every other weekend. I went to school meetings and soccer games. Then Richard appeared. He was neat, tall, always in a suit. He owned a construction supply company and loved to talk about deals and numbers. When I met him the first time, he shook my hand too hard and told me he admired hands-on guys like me. I could tell it was not so much admiration as amusement. Slowly, Ethan's birthdays moved from my small rented house to Laura and Richard's bigger one. I went, of course. I brought presents I could afford, a tool set, a used guitar, a simple watch. Richard's gifts were larger, a gaming console, a new phone, tickets to a big game. People noticed. I could see it in their faces. At one birthday dinner, I was seated at the far end of the table near the kitchen door, while Richard sat at the head, carving the roast and making jokes. When someone asked Ethan who had taught him to drive, he hesitated, looked at both of us, and then laughed it off. Later, when I drove home alone, I realized I could not remember the last time Ethan had stayed over at my place. When Ethan finished high school, I wanted him to have a chance at something I never did, college without crushing debt. My shop was doing fine then. I had a few loyal clients, some fleet contracts. I was not rich, but I was stable. A friend told me about setting up a trust, something formal and safe. I did not know much about that world, so I called a lawyer someone recommended, Patricia. Her office had tall windows and shelves full of thick books. She was older than me, with short gray hair and clear eyes that missed nothing. I explained that I wanted to put money aside for Ethan's education and future, something that could not be touched by my own mistakes or bad luck. She asked careful questions about my finances, my relationship with Ethan, my goals. She mentioned that in some cases people included special conditions in these things. Sometimes those conditions were about school performance, sometimes about staying away from drugs or crime, sometimes about staying in contact with certain family members. I laughed when she brought up those last ideas. I told her I did not want to control Ethan's life from a distance. I just wanted him to be safe. She nodded and drafted the papers in a way she thought made sense. I trusted her. I signed where she showed me, handed over years of savings, and walked out feeling like I had given Ethan a strong floor under his feet. At the graduation from his university, I sat in the middle of a long row in the stands with other parents and relatives. Laura and Richard were down front, in the reserved section. When Ethan went on stage to get his degree, he looked out and lifted his hands. I waved back, unsure if he could see me. Later, at the party at their house, he gave a little speech. He thanked his mom for her support and thanked Richard for guiding him. He said something about having a strong male role model. I clapped. I smiled. But inside, a small, quiet part of me shrank a little and moved to the back of the room. The engagement party years later was at the country club, the same place they later used for the secret wedding. I remember arriving and feeling like I had walked into a magazine. Everything was white and gold. There were waiters with trays, a string quartet, and a big sign with Ethan and Chloe's names. When I checked in at the front desk, the young woman asked if I was with the Mason party. I told her I was Ethan's father. She glanced at her list and pointed me toward the hall. Inside, Richard was telling a group of guests that he had watched Ethan grow into a man. He put his hand on Ethan's shoulder and said he could not be prouder of his son. The words sounded familiar. They were things I had said in my head 100 times. Someone asked who I was, and another guest answered before I could speak. They said I was Ethan's other dad, in a tone usually used for distant relatives. There were photos that night. The photographer kept asking for immediate family and guiding Laura, Richard, Ethan, and Chloe into poses. When I tried to join one, the photographer gently told me they wanted just parents and the couple for that shot. I stepped back and watched from the side. Standing in my shop that day after the empty restaurant, I saw all those moments together for the first time, like pieces of a puzzle that had always been scattered. Maybe I had been slow to notice. Maybe I had not wanted to see it. It was easier to believe that these were small oversights, not a pattern. At lunchtime, Luis and I sat on overturned buckets near the back door, like we always did. We shared a bag of chips and some sandwiches. He looked at his phone and shook his head. He said he had seen Ethan's wedding photos online. I told him I had seen them too. He said it was strange, considering everything I had done for Ethan, that I was not in any of the pictures. I shrugged and said maybe they had just posted a few. Luis gave me a look that said he did not believe that. He reminded me of things I had almost forgotten myself. He said that when Ethan needed money for textbooks, it was me who came in early and stayed late for weeks. When Ethan's first car broke down, it was me who fixed it for free and paid for the parts. When Ethan wanted to move closer to campus, it was me who signed papers at the bank to help with the deposit and the rent guarantee. I listened, chewing slowly. I had taken those actions for granted. That was what parents were supposed to do. I had never added up the cost like a bill. Luis sighed and asked how Ethan had afforded his degree and his new condo. I told him that I had set up something years ago, a trust with money from the shop profits and some savings, to pay for school and help him start his adult life. I said it like it was nothing special. Luis frowned and asked if my name was still on the trust. I said I believed so. I told him that as far as I knew, I was still the one who had created it, and that it was still linked to my accounts and my business. He leaned back and whistled softly. He said that maybe Ethan and his in-laws had forgotten who made all this possible, but the paperwork had not. His words hung in the air for a moment. Grease smell, traffic noise, a distant car horn, the hum of the shop fans. Everything else faded. I realized I had not looked at those papers in years. I had not thought of myself as someone with any kind of power or leverage. I was just the guy people called when their engine light came on. Luis wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me carefully. He said that it was one thing for them to treat me badly at parties, to sit me at the far end of tables, to forget to include me in speeches, but it was another thing entirely to erase me from my son's wedding while still letting my money carry them. He asked me if I was really okay with that. I did not answer right away. The question sat between us, heavier than any engine block. I thought about the torn check in my trash can at home. I thought about the social media album where another man was named as the one who gave my son away. I thought about those papers in Patricia's office, with my name on the first line. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet. I said that I had never gone back to that lawyer after the trust was set up. I had never checked if anything had changed. Maybe it was time to do that. Luis nodded slowly. He said that sometimes the only language people like Richard understood was money and contracts. He said that maybe it was time for my side of the story to show up there too. That afternoon, after we closed the shop, I locked the office and stayed behind while Luis went home. The building was quiet, just the ticking of the wall clock and the ping of cooling metal in the bays. I stood in the middle of the office and looked around at the file cabinets, the old metal box in the corner, the framed photo of a much younger Ethan holding a wrench next to me. I walked over to the cabinet, pulled open the bottom drawer, and took out a folder with my name on it. Behind it, there was another folder with Ethan's name printed in my careful block letters. I pulled that one out too. It felt heavier than it looked. My stomach tightened in a way that felt almost like fear, but not quite. It felt like the start of something I had never allowed myself to imagine. I walked to my truck with the folder under my arm and locked the shop door behind me. As I slid into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed in my pocket. When I checked it, I saw Ethan's name. He had sent a message, a short one, telling me not to make drama about the wedding and to please stay positive for future family events. I stared at the words, then at the folder on the passenger seat. For the first time in a long time, I did not answer him right away. For the first time in a long time, I did not answer him right away. I put the phone face down on the seat and started the engine. The folder with Ethan's name lay on the passenger side like a quiet passenger. The sun was low, turning the shop windows orange as I pulled out onto the road. On the way home, my phone buzzed a few more times. I did not look. I drove through streets I knew by heart, past the grocery store where I used to take Ethan for ice cream, past the park where I had pushed him on the swings. At every red light, I could feel the vibration in my pocket, but I kept my hands on the wheel. In my apartment, I put the folder on the kitchen table and finally checked my phone. There were 2 messages from Ethan. In the first, he wrote that he felt I was being childish about the wedding and that I needed to understand it had been a busy time. In the second, he said he loved me, but that I often made things about myself and that it was stressful for him and Chloe. I read his words slowly. He said he loved me, but the rest of the message did not feel like love. It felt like a script he had learned from someone else, lines about drama and stress and boundaries. I could almost hear Laura's voice behind the words, shaping them. I did not answer. Instead, I opened the folder. Inside were copies of the trust documents, old letters from the bank, notes in Patricia's handwriting, and a few pages where I had scribbled numbers years ago. There was also a small, folded sheet with my own writing, a list of reasons I had made the trust in the first place. At the top of that page, I had written Ethan's name. Under it, I had written words like security, education, and chance. My phone buzzed again, but this time the sound was different. It was the tone I had set for my daughter, Emma. I opened her message. She asked if I was okay and said that she had heard there had been some confusion about the restaurant. She wrote that Mom was upset and that Ethan had told everyone I had read the invite wrong and then accused them of leaving me out on purpose. She added that there was a family group chat where they were trying to decide what to do about me. She said she did not think it was fair, but she did not want to fight with them. She asked if she could send me a screenshot so that I would know what people were saying. I told her that she could. A moment later, the image came through. I opened it and felt my chest tighten. In the chat, Laura had written that she was worried I might cause a scene if I was at important events. She claimed that I had always been difficult and that she had tried to include me at the restaurant out of kindness, but that I had made everyone uncomfortable by showing up at the wrong time and then leaving. Richard had written that he would handle father of the groom duties, and that it might be better for Ethan if I kept my distance at future public things. Someone else in the chat, probably Chloe from the way she wrote, said that she wanted a calm, classy image and that she did not want people thinking there was drama in the family. The words blurred for a moment. I zoomed in on one line from Laura where she said that Ethan needed to think of his real future and his real father figure. I stared at that sentence until the screen dimmed. My own name did not appear anywhere in the chat except when they talked about controlling me. Emma's last message in that thread said that she thought they were being unfair and that they should remember everything I had done. After that, there was silence. No one had answered her. That hurt almost more than the rest. I sat back in my chair and let the phone drop to the table. Around me, my apartment was quiet. The clock in the kitchen ticked. The fridge hummed. Outside, a car door closed somewhere down the street. Inside me, something settled. It was not anger, not the hot kind that makes you shout and slam doors. It was colder and clearer than that. It felt like the moment when you finally see that a car frame is too bent to fix, no matter how much you want to straighten it. You stop hitting it with a hammer. You stop telling yourself one more pull will make it right. You accept that it is not going back to how it was. I realized that for years I had been trying to bend myself into the shape they wanted. I had cut my sentences short so that Richard could speak. I had stood at the back of rooms so that he could be in the center of every picture. I had smiled whenever they used words like stepdad and real father, even when it bruised something inside me. I had kept paying, kept giving, kept showing up, because that was what a good father was supposed to do. That night, I understood something simple. If they did not want me as a father in their stories and their speeches, then maybe they should not have me as a father in their finances either. If Richard wanted to stand in my place at every emotional moment, he could stand in the hard places too. I picked up the trust documents again. I do not understand legal language very well, but Patricia had written some notes in plain words on sticky tabs years ago. One tab marked a section that mentioned the conditions under which the trust could be changed or revoked. Another marked the part about how the funds could be used and what they could back or guarantee. There was one more tab, a small yellow one, next to a paragraph that my eyes slipped over at first. Next to it, in her careful handwriting, Patricia had written that this section was about respect and ongoing relationship. I remembered sitting in her office as she explained it. She had said that I could leave things simple if I wanted, but that if I worried about being cut off, we could include language to protect against certain kinds of behavior. I had laughed and said I trusted my son. I had told her she could put in whatever she thought was reasonable. Looking at it now, I wished I had listened more closely all those years ago. But maybe I had listened enough. I could not fully understand the legal words on my own, but I understood one thing clearly. There were conditions there. They were written down, signed, and witnessed. They had not been written by Laura or Richard. They had been written for me. The next day was Sunday. The shop was closed. I woke up early anyway. The folder was still on the table where I had left it, like a guest that had stayed the night. I made coffee and sat down with it again. This time, I brought a notepad and a pen. I wrote down simple questions in my own words. I wrote that I wanted to know what the trust could do and what it could stop. I wrote that I wanted to know how Ethan's future and Richard's business were tied to my name. Around mid-morning, my phone rang. It was Ethan. For a moment, I thought about not answering, but I pressed the button. His voice sounded tired and annoyed. He said he had heard that Emma had sent me the group chat screenshot and that it was out of context. He said I always took things too personally. He said I was making him and Chloe feel guilty on what should be the happiest week of their lives. I told him that I had gone to the restaurant at the time I had been told and found nothing. I told him I had learned that the real ceremony had happened without me. I said I felt hurt. He sighed and said that the country club ceremony had been put together quickly and that it had been easier to keep things simple. He said that Richard had helped pay for it and that there had been limited space. He added that he had figured I would understand because things were better this way, without awkwardness. He said that I was his father, but that I made people uncomfortable sometimes. He said he needed peace and that he did not want drama at his events. Hearing my son talk about me like that was like listening to someone read a review of a stranger. Calm, polite words that still cut. I told him I was not planning to cause a scene. I told him that I just needed some time. He said he hoped I would not ruin his reception later that month, because it was important for his career and for Richard's company. He stressed the part about Richard's company. Then he said he had to go and ended the call before I could say anything else. I sat there with the silent phone in my hand and felt that cold clarity settle deeper. My son did not see me as someone whose feelings mattered. He saw me as a possible problem, a thing to manage. He was more worried about Richard's reputation than about the fact that his own father had been turned into a guest at his life. That afternoon, I called Patricia's office and left a message. I said that I needed to review some old documents we had done years ago. I gave my name and Ethan's name. I tried to keep my voice neutral. When she called back an hour later, her tone was warm but professional. She said she remembered me and the trust. She asked if everything was all right. I told her that I had some questions. I said there had been changes in my family situation. I did not go into details. She said that we could meet the next day if I brought all my copies of the paperwork and any recent bank letters. There was a pause, and then she added that it might be important to act sooner rather than later if I was worried about anything. That word act made my heart beat a little faster. I spent the evening gathering everything I could find. Old envelopes, bank statements, letters from the trust manager. I put them all in a bigger folder. I added the printed screenshot of the group chat and a few screenshots of the wedding posts where Richard was listed as father of the groom, and I was nowhere. I did not know if those things would matter legally, but they mattered to me. When I went to bed, I placed my phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling in the dark. My thoughts were not loud anymore. They were like quiet, straight lines. I knew I could not change how Ethan felt overnight. I could not make Laura respect me with one conversation, but I could decide what my money, my promises, and my name were attached to. Before I closed my eyes, I picked up my phone and opened the calendar. I created a new reminder for the next morning. I set it for 9 o'clock and wrote 3 words in the title: Trust Review, Monday. When I pressed save, a soft chime sounded in the quiet room, and the little notification appeared on the screen, waiting. Monday morning, I woke up before the alarm again. For a moment, I did not remember why my chest felt tight. Then I saw the folder on the chair by the door, packed full of papers. The reminder on my phone glowed on the screen. Trust Review, Monday, 9 p.m. I dressed in clean work pants and a simple shirt, not my shop clothes. The city was just starting to move when I drove downtown. Rush hour traffic crawled, but I did not feel impatient. My hands were steady on the wheel. I was not sure what I hoped to hear. I only knew I needed the truth. Patricia's office was on the 10th floor of a glass building. The lobby smelled like polished stone and coffee. Men and women in suits moved quickly, holding laptops and paper cups. I felt old in my worn jacket, like a mechanic who had walked into the wrong scene. Still, when I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button, I felt strangely calm. I was not here as a guest. I was here with my own name on documents. Her assistant greeted me by name when I walked into the office. That small thing mattered. It reminded me that there was at least one place where I had not been replaced. The waiting area was quiet. I sat down, folder on my lap, and stared at a framed certificate on the wall until Patricia stepped out and called me in. She shook my hand and asked how I had been. I said I had been busy at the shop. Then I told her I needed to understand what we had set up back then for Ethan and how things worked now. Her eyes sharpened in a way I remembered. She invited me to sit and asked me to start from the beginning. I told her, in simple words, what had happened with the restaurant and the wedding. I told her about learning that the real ceremony had been at the country club without me. I told her about the group chat where Laura said I would embarrass them and where Richard said he would handle father of the groom duties. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I just laid out the facts. Patricia listened without interrupting. Sometimes she wrote notes. Sometimes her jaw clenched a little. When I finished, I placed the thick folder on her desk and pushed it toward her. I said that I knew these papers were important, but that I did not fully understand them. I asked her, as directly as I could, what power I actually had and what my options were. She opened the folder and went through the contents with a trained eye. She pulled out the trust deed, some bank letters, and her own old notes. She nodded slowly at a few pages. Once she raised her eyebrows and said she was glad we had written things the way we had. I asked what that meant. She said that she could not give me all the details in 1 minute, but that, from what she was seeing, I had more control than I thought. She asked if I knew how Ethan and his in-laws were using the trust right now. I said I assumed it was for his condo and his education. She said that was likely true, but she wanted to confirm it with the bank. She asked my permission to contact them. I said yes. She picked up the phone right there and called a contact at the bank. She gave my name, the trust name, and a few numbers from the documents. I sat in the chair and listened to her half of the conversation. Her tone stayed calm but grew more focused. She asked if any part of the trust was tied to collateral for loans. She asked if Ethan's home loan relied on it. She asked if any third-party company had used it as a guarantee. She paused, wrote something down, then asked the person on the other end to email her a summary and copies of certain agreements. When she hung up, she looked at me for a long moment. Then she said that, yes, my trust had been used as a key piece of Ethan's financial life, and that, on top of that, it had been used to make Richard's company look safer to the bank. She said that this was not illegal. Many families use trusts that way. But she added that all of it depended on my continued consent and on the original conditions we had written. Hearing that made something shift inside me. For years I had thought of myself as the extra chair in the room, the one you could remove without anyone noticing. Now I learned that in at least one important system, I was more like a beam holding up part of the ceiling. Patricia told me we would need to review every line of the trust and every related agreement. She said there might be steps we could take if I felt that Ethan had broken the spirit of the deal. She did not promise anything dramatic. She simply said that papers mattered and that we had written careful ones. We would go through them, slowly and properly. She asked if I was sure I wanted to move forward because it could change things between me and my son forever. I answered that things had already changed when he stood in front of everyone and let another man be called his father while I sat alone at home. I said I would rather live with the consequences of a clear decision than keep bleeding slowly from 1,000 small cuts. We set another meeting for later in the week. She would study the documents. I would gather any new financial papers and any proof of how I had been erased in public events. She said evidence of public statements might matter more than I thought. After I left her office, I went straight to the bank. It was just a few blocks away, in a big building with marble floors. A young man greeted me at the desk and asked how he could help. I told him my name and said I needed to speak to someone about a trust account. He checked his screen, then led me to a small office where an older banker introduced himself. The banker had a practiced smile. He asked if I wanted coffee or water. I said no. I explained that I just needed to understand the current status of the trust I had created for my son and how it was connected to any loans or mortgages. He pulled up the account on his computer and clicked through several screens. From where I sat, I could not read the text, but I could see the lines of numbers and the way certain fields were highlighted. He told me in a polite voice that the trust was in good standing and that it was considered a strong asset. He said it was linked to my son's condo loan, which made sense to me. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, that a portion of it had been pledged in support of a business credit line held by Mason Construction Supply, Richard's company. He said this had been done with the proper signatures some years after the trust was created. I asked who had signed, since the trust was mine. He looked again and said that my signature was on the permission form, but that it was from a meeting where the bank had presented it as a way to give my son more future security, as his job was then tied to that company. I searched my memory and faintly recalled a meeting with Ethan and Richard present, where they had talked about helping Ethan's career with a simple paper. At the time, I had not understood all the details, but I had wanted to support my son. Now, hearing how my trust was holding up part of Richard's business line, I felt that same cold clarity sharpen. I asked the banker, in simple words, what would happen if the trust terms changed or if I removed certain guarantees. His smile grew tighter. He said that he could not give detailed advice there, but that any change would require the bank to review all loans that depended on that asset. He used words like reassessments, adjusted terms, and possible recalls. I thanked him and stood to leave. At the door, he said he hoped everything was fine in my family. I told him that, one way or another, everything would be clear soon. Back at the shop that afternoon, I stayed late in the office. When the last customer left, I locked the front door and sat at the computer. I opened social media and pulled up Ethan's wedding album again. I took screenshots of every photo where Richard was tagged or named as Ethan's father. I saved the captions where Chloe called him her amazing father-in-law and thanked him for walking Ethan down the aisle and giving him away. I did not see my own name anywhere. I printed the screenshots and laid them on the desk, one by one. Richard's smile filled page after page. In some pictures, he had his arm around Ethan. In others, he stood beside Chloe's parents, part of one solid, rich-looking wall of adults. There were group shots labeled family only that I had never been invited to join. It was all there, in ink. My phone buzzed. Emma had sent a message asking if we could talk in person sometime soon. She said she felt stuck between people she loved and that she needed to understand what I was planning, if anything. I told her she could come by my apartment that evening. Later, she sat on my couch, holding a mug of tea. She was 24 now, with tired eyes for someone so young. She said that after I left the restaurant, Mom had been furious, saying I had overreacted and embarrassed everyone. Richard had agreed, saying that I never knew how to handle high-class events. Ethan had stayed quiet. That was what bothered her the most, she said, the silence. She told me about the new reception that was being planned. It would not just be a family party, but a corporate-style gala at a hotel ballroom. Richard's company was hosting it, combining the wedding celebration with a business event. They would present Ethan as part of the next generation of the company, the fresh face tied to the brand. Many clients and partners would be there. There would be speeches and photos and a big stage. I listened and asked simple questions. Who would speak? Who was listed on the invite? Emma said that from what she had seen, the printed drafts called Richard the proud father of the groom. My name, she said, was on the list of ordinary guests near the bottom. Not as father, just as Michael Harris, guest. She watched my face as she said it, as if she expected me to explode. I did not. Inside, I felt something lock into place, like a bolt sliding into a firm hole. I told her I was not going to fight for a spot in their photos anymore. I told her I was not going to beg to stand beside someone for a speech. Those days were done. She asked what that meant. I said it meant that from now on, my actions would match the way they already treated me. If they saw me as extra, then I would stop being the foundation. She looked scared and sad at the same time. She asked if I was going to cut Ethan off completely. I told her I was not planning to hurt anyone out of spite, but that I would no longer carry people who pretended I did not exist. I said that I was meeting with Patricia again, and that we would go through everything properly. Before she left, Emma hugged me. She whispered that she was sorry, and that she wished things were different. I told her none of this was her fault, and that I would never ask her to take sides. I meant it then, though I knew that someday she might have to decide what truth she believed. The next day, during our lunch break at the shop, I showed Luis one of the printed invitations that Emma had taken a photo of and sent to me. At the top, in fancy letters, it announced a grand reception hosted by Richard and Laura Mason. Underneath, in smaller font, it described how they proudly presented the wedding celebration of their son, Ethan, and his wife, Chloe. When you looked at the fine print, you saw my name only once, near the end, with no title, no father, no nothing. Luis stared at it, then looked at me. He said that if that was how they wanted to play it, maybe it was time to let the papers speak back. I told him that was exactly what I planned to do. That evening, I came home to find a thick, cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. It had gold trimming and my name written in neat script. Inside was the official printed invitation to the hotel ballroom gala, the same one Emma had described. On the front page, in big letters, it said, "Richard and Laura Mason proudly present the wedding reception of their son Ethan and his wife Chloe." My name was there, near the bottom, next to guest. I held the card in my hand for a long time, letting the words sink in. Then I placed it carefully on the table next to the folder with the trust papers. I looked at both of them, side by side, one full of legal agreements with my name at the top, one full of pretty words where I was almost invisible. For the first time, I felt no confusion at all about which one truly mattered. I picked up my phone and opened my calendar again. On the date of the reception, I added a new event. I did not write Ethan's party or wedding reception. I wrote 4 simple words. Ballroom, speak my part. The days between the bank meeting and my next visit to Patricia passed in a slow, heavy way. I went to the shop, fixed cars, took payments, and joked with customers like always. But it felt like my mind was running on 2 tracks at once. On one track were engines, brakes, and invoices. On the other were dates, invitations, and quiet decisions. At night, I kept the trust folder and the reception invitation side by side on my kitchen table. Sometimes I would sit there after dinner with a cup of coffee and just look at them. One piece of paper said I was the foundation. The other said I was just a name at the bottom of a guest list. The contrast stayed with me. When the day of my second meeting with Patricia came, I closed the shop for the morning. Luis did not complain. He said he would handle phone calls and simple drop-offs until I came back. He knew, even without full details, that this was important. Patricia greeted me with the same firm handshake as before. Her desk was covered with neatly stacked documents now, some of them mine, some of them fresh from the bank and other offices. She had highlighted lines and marked pages with colored tabs. It was clear she had not taken this lightly. She started by telling me, in simple language, what she had confirmed. She said that the trust we had set up for Ethan was strong, and that it had been used to support his education, his condo, and part of Richard's business line, just as the banker had hinted. Then she talked about the conditions we had written all those years ago. She reminded me that, at the time, she had suggested including a clause about ongoing relationship and basic respect to protect me from being used and then discarded. She said I had agreed, even if I had not expected to need it. The details were complex, full of legal words, but she put it in plain terms. The trust gave me the right to make changes if I could show that I had been openly erased as a parent in major life events, while my support was still being used in the background. She did not tell me what to do, she just laid out options. She said I could leave everything as it was and try to talk to Ethan, I could make minor adjustments, or, if I felt certain lines had been crossed, I could trigger the parts of the agreement that allowed a deeper change. Some of those changes, she warned, would affect not just Ethan, but also any loans tied to the trust, including the ones supporting Richard's company. I listened without interrupting. I thought about the empty restaurant, the unseen ceremony at the country club, the group chat, the photos where Richard held my son like he was the only father he had ever had. I thought about the official reception invitation calling Ethan their son. I told Patricia that I did not want to harm anyone out of simple revenge. I said I had no desire to see my son left on the street. But I also said that I could not keep a structure in place that let other people parade around as the builders of his life while my part stayed invisible. I said if Ethan wanted Richard to be his father in every public way, then Richard could carry the weight too. Patricia nodded. She said if that was truly how I felt, we could start certain processes. She slid a small stack of forms across the desk, not to read, but to sign. She explained briefly that they related to changes in the trust, changes in beneficiaries, and changes in guarantees tied to outside parties. She did not go into detail. That would come later in other offices, other conversations. For now, she needed my consent to move. Holding the pen, I hesitated for a second. This was not like tearing up a check in my truck. This was more permanent. I thought about the little boy under the kitchen table asking about tools. I thought about the man at the country club letting another man stand in my place. Then I remembered that both boys were the same person and that I had done my part. I signed. Patricia told me there would be more steps. She would coordinate with the bank. Letters would go out to all involved. Certain changes would only take full effect after a short period. She also suggested that I keep any proof I had of public statements where I had been erased. I told her I had already printed some. She almost smiled at that, a quick, approving look. When I left her office, the folder felt lighter in my hand, even though I had added papers to it. Something had shifted from thinking to doing. The next few days were a mix of normal work and quiet preparation. I met with the banker again, this time in a more formal room. We went over documents together. He explained in cautious language what the bank would need to do if certain guarantees changed. His words were careful, my decision was not. I gave the necessary approvals, signed where I was told, and left knowing that certain gears were now turning in systems much bigger than my little shop. At home, I made 2 new envelopes. In the first, I placed a check made out to Emma. It was enough to clear the rest of her student loans and give her a cushion. I wrote her name on the front in steady letters. In the second, I put another check, smaller but still meaningful, made out to a local scholarship fund for students in trades. I had always believed not every good life came from a university. I wrote a note to the fund, asking that they name the scholarship after my father, who had taught me how to hold a wrench. Those 2 envelopes felt different from the one I had torn up. They felt clean. They felt like I was closing one chapter and opening another, with intention rather than hope. One evening, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and practiced talking. I did not practice a long speech. I knew myself. I would lose the thread if I tried to remember too many sentences. Instead, I focused on 3 things: speaking calmly, stating facts, and not apologizing for my own existence. I practiced saying that I had been a father in more ways than their photos showed. I practiced saying that I would no longer pay to disappear. I did not rehearse anger. I rehearsed clarity. As the date of the reception got closer, Emma called a few times. She said the plans were getting bigger every day. There would be a stage, lights, even a screen showing photos and short videos of Ethan and Chloe. Richard was very excited. He was telling everyone this would be a perfect blend of family and business. She said my name was not in any of the draft scripts she had seen. I told her that she did not need to worry about that. I would take care of my part. On the morning of the reception, I opened my closet and took out my suit, the same one I had worn to the empty restaurant. I brushed it with my hand, checked for new wrinkles, and ironed the shirt again. I polished my shoes until they shone as much as they could. On the chair by the door, I laid out the folder. Inside it now were copies of the trust deed, notes from Patricia, the bank confirmations, printed wedding posts, and the reception invitation. I slid one blank page into the folder as well. I liked the idea of a space for new words, even if I never wrote on it. Before I left, I made myself a simple meal and forced myself to eat it. I did not want to be standing on an empty stomach. Then I picked up the folder, put on my jacket, and walked out. The hotel was in the best part of town, a place I rarely went. Its lobby had shiny floors, high ceilings, and a chandelier that looked like frozen rain. Guests in suits and dresses moved in every direction. Staff in uniforms carried trays and checked lists. At the coat check, a young woman asked for my name. I gave it. She looked at her tablet, scrolled, and hesitated. Then she found me near the bottom of the guest list. She smiled and gave me a small card with my table number. Her politeness was professional, not personal. That was fine. I was not here to be admired. Inside the ballroom, the air was full of soft music and low voices. Round tables covered in white cloth filled the room. Each table had a centerpiece made of flowers and small lights. At one end of the hall, a stage stood under a large screen. On the screen, a slideshow of Ethan and Chloe's lives played on a loop. Baby pictures, school photos, engagement shots, all carefully arranged. In many of the newer pictures, Richard appeared, standing next to Ethan at sports games, handing him car keys, clapping at some company event. If there were any photos of me beyond early childhood, they did not appear while I watched. Richard was already working the room, shaking hands, laughing, pointing people toward their seats. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than my truck. When he saw me, his smile flickered for a second and then came back. He walked over and greeted me in a tone that suggested I was an unexpected but not dangerous guest. He said he was glad I could make it, that this was an important night for Ethan and for the company, and that he hoped everyone could be on their best behavior. I heard what he really meant. He meant he hoped I would stay quiet and invisible. Laura came over as well. She looked polished, with perfect hair and a dress that matched the room. She asked if I had found my seat. She said she wanted everything to go smoothly. She did not say she was happy I was there. Ethan passed nearby, talking to a group of young colleagues. He looked bright and confident. When he noticed me, he gave a small wave, more like he was greeting a distant cousin than his father. Emma found me and hugged me quickly. She whispered that she was glad I had come. Her eyes were wet. She looked around nervously, as if she was afraid someone would see her being too close to me. I told her quietly that she did not need to be afraid for my sake. I had come here knowing exactly who I was. I took my seat at a table near the back. The people around me were mostly distant relatives and a few minor company employees. They chatted about business, market trends, and how nice the hall looked. Some of them asked how I knew Ethan. When I said I was his father, they blinked in surprise and then quickly rearranged their faces. That reaction told me everything I needed to know about the story they had been given. On the stage, the master of ceremonies tested the microphone. The music lowered. Guests began to sit down. Waiters moved between tables, refilling glasses. The big screen faded to the event logo with Ethan and Chloe's names in cursive. I rested my folder on my knee, one hand on top of it. I could feel the weight through the fabric of my pants. It was not a heavy file, but it might as well have been made of stone. The MC welcomed everyone in a bright voice. He talked about love, partnership, and the strength of family. He talked about how proud the hosts were to share this night with friends, relatives, and important business partners. He thanked Richard and Laura for their generosity and vision. Then he said it was time to hear from someone very special. He announced that the proud father of the groom would give the first toast of the evening. All eyes turned to the front as Richard rose from his place, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the stage. From my chair at the back, I watched him climb the steps and take the microphone while my fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the folder on my lap. Richard began his toast as if he had been waiting his whole life for that moment. He talked about watching Ethan grow into a man. He said he had guided him into adulthood, taught him about business, stood behind him in every big decision. He said that seeing Ethan marry Chloe was the proudest day of his life as a father. People laughed at his jokes and clinked glasses at his pauses. The big screen behind him showed more photos of Ethan with Richard at graduations, at offices, at golf courses. My face did not appear. I sat and listened to every word, my hand still on the folder. When he finished, the room applauded. The MC thanked him and said it was wonderful to hear from the father of the groom. Emma, from her table, caught the MC's sleeve and said something in his ear. His smile flickered, then he recovered. He announced that Ethan's other parent might also like to say a few words, and pointed in my direction. Chairs turned. People seemed surprised. Some looked curious, some annoyed. I stood up, picked up the folder, and walked slowly to the stage. My shoes sounded soft against the floor, but to me it felt like each step landed with weight. On the stage, I did not look at Richard or Laura first. I looked at Ethan. His smile had gone. He looked nervous, as if he had finally remembered that I existed. I took the microphone from the MC and thanked everyone for coming. I kept my voice low. I said I would not take long. I opened the folder.